So the rack itself is going to include some combination of passive gear like nuts here, active camming devices, which are in this case some spring-loaded camming devices, and possibly some like tri-cams or other pieces of protection that you might prefer to use. Now, what you see here would suffice as a triple rack for just about any climb. A triple rack up to a number 2, and number 2 designates the width of a crack, or 2-inch crack. So this particular cam, if I were to bring it to like that ideal camming position, that distance there should be 2 inches. Obviously this fits like a range larger than 2 inches and smaller than 2 inches, and it should bleed over nicely into like a number 1, which will bleed over nicely to a 0.75 and so on throughout your rack. The nuts obviously don't have that advantage, but then again, you're looking for constrictions, so cracks aren't always just parallel the whole way up. They'll like flare and move in and out, and that's where nuts are phenomenal, especially in small cracks. So when I say a single rack or a double rack or a triple rack, what I'm referring to is the number of pieces you have to fill a gap within a range of sizes. So a single rack from 0.2 to a number 2, which is 0.2 inches to 2 inches, meaning that every one of these cams should fit every gap increment within from a 0.2 inch fissure or crack to a 2-inch fissure or crack. Now that's important because if you look at guides which give you tips on what gear to bring, they're going to refer to a single rack and then doubles or triples of some sizes, maybe even quadruples, maybe up to 6, because you can't have cracks that they don't vary in size, so you just need to bring a whole ton of number 2s or something along those lines. Now, in general, a single rack is referring to a rack that covers from 0.3 out to the number 2. And that can be a different number of pieces, because you have to remember that these cams and the way they're designed cover different ranges of sizes. So a Metolius, you would need more cams to cover the same range as a BD does. Good example of this, if you watch the first video, I mentioned that I use black diamond, a combination of black diamond and Metolius. And specifically, I use the Metolius cams from what would essentially be a 0.5 all the way down to a 000. So when you get to 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, and then it'll start going like 0, 00, 000. They're the smaller size cams. Now, I don't have the TCUs anymore. I instead replace them with X4s. So I have 3 cams here. These 3 cams cover an equivalent range as 4 Metolius TCUs. Alright, that sounds better initially, but the thing is, the TCU is good has some very, very good applications, and it's a very, very good cam. These guys, Black Diamond, I believe uses 14.25 degrees for their camming angle. So they fit a wider range of cam than the Metoliuses do, but the shallower angle that Metolius uses supposedly has greater stopping power. So it's a give and take. I personally do like the X4s. I have not fallen on one yet, so we'll see how they hold up when that happens. I've certainly fallen on the equivalent size TCUs, and they held every single time. It's worth considering. When I first asked for advice as to what gear I should buy to build out a rack, I was told once by someone that look up a climb that you want to do or climbs that you want to do and judge the equipment or the gear that you want to buy based upon what the guide suggests. Now, I thought it was great advice at the time until I looked in the guide, the Williams guide for the gunks, which was the area that I was most interested in, and it had nothing on the gear I would need for the gunks. So it didn't seem like worthwhile advice until I started buying other guidebooks and for other areas, and I realized that it's actually standard practice to give some pro beta for particular climbs. This is the Squamish Select, which is the only select guide I've ever bought, and for the climbs that it has listed, it does give very good beta in terms of, like, the topos are good, and it also gives you good gear beta. I'm figured the best way to illustrate this is to actually rack up for a climb out of this book. And I'm going to do that after I go over runners. But it's not the same from one guide to the next. So if I look in, this is the Yosemite Free, and I'm just opening to a random spot. This one will say, so this particular Sunnyside bench, Pro 2 each from 0.5 to 3 inches. That's pretty straightforward. But if, let me see if I can find a, so this one's not quite as clear. Pro 1 to 2 each of 0.4 inch to 3 inch. So is it 1 or 2, which is the difference of a single rack or a double rack. Now, if I look in the Squamish Select guide here, and we'll just go to a different climb. This says SR, which stands for single rack, to 3.5 inch. So that's the base of your rack, and then it suggests doubling up on your 0.6 to 3.5 inch clams. So, or cams. So, I mean, that's a good bit of gear. That's essentially asking you to bring a double rack. Point being is it differs from guide to guide. It's worthwhile to get suggestions. If your guide does not have pro beta for a particular climb or climbs that you're going to be, frequenting most, generally just ask for advice. People are going to, regardless of where you're going to be, you'll definitely want to get a single rack. So the base stuff you'll need. A single rack, which we want to be absolutely official about this. So there's every size range from 0.2 to number 2. Number 3, you're not going to use it all the time, but probably good to have. And then you'll definitely want some passive gear. I know people give me grief for not using this enough. Look, simply, if it's a climb that's at the edge of my comfort level, you'll see me using these. I've fallen on nuts more than I have fallen on cams. But if I'm on a climb I'm really comfortable with and everything's cruiser, or at least feels cruiser, yeah, I'll probably be plugging more of these guys than these guys, just because it's easier. But in any case, I still bring these with me. So here's my smaller nuts into my mid-sized nuts, and depending upon how the climb looks, I might have these as well. They're probably good to purchase. So in terms of like an initial rack purchase, what you see right here, these are totems. These two are black diamond. There's equivalent size ranges over here, but that would kind of look in terms of like your pro itself. An initial first rack might look something like this.